1984 by George Orwell, Terms and Definitions. I might be beating a dead horse with 1984, saying how important it is, but if you consider yourself a conspiracist and you haven't read 1984, then you're really not. You're not in. This book is required reading. There are people all over the United States that believe they've read 1984. They'll say that they read it in high school or college, but when you press them on it, all they could say is Big Brother. Or that's really what they say for the most part. But there's so much more than just Big Brother. And if they had actually read and comprehended what they read, there's no way the world would be the way it is right now. Because this book is the blueprint to everything. And as they say, Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning, not as a how-to guide. But it's been utilized as a how-to guide. And this was written in 1948. You'll be blown away at how it resembles present-day reality. So a lot of this information you're about to see came from this website, newspeakdictionary.com. This site is one of the better sites that pays honor to 1984. The most important part of 1984, in my opinion, is the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. And that website seems to also see the value in that section of the book. There is no substitute for reading the book, but in this video, I'm going to give you some of the most popular concepts from the book in hopes that if you haven't read it, that these concepts intrigue you enough that you go out and get yourself a copy of 1984. If you want to wait 2 more years to get it, I understand because it'll be public domain at that point. But or maybe 3 or 4 years from now, it'll be public domain. But I really recommend you spring the $5 to $7, get it, read it. This is as good as it gets. If you want if you want it spoon-fed to you, this is as good as it gets. In fact, you know what? Don't even bother getting the book. The audio book is online. The guy that narrates it is the same guy that narrated Atlas Shrugged. So he's a really great narrator. Consider that Atlas Shrugged is a 60-hour audiobook, and I endured the entire thing because the narration was so superb, and the narration on the 1984 audiobook is also equally excellent. So what else can I tell you other than if you haven't read 1984, I know you've heard about it your whole life. You have to experience it. All right, so let's get into this. Big Brother. I know you've heard of Big Brother. Big Brother is a fictional character in George Orwell's novel 1984. He is the enigmatic dictator of Oceania, a totalitarian state taken to its utmost logical consequence, where the ruling party wields total power for its own sake over the inhabitants. In the society that Orwell describes, everyone is under complete surveillance by the authorities, mainly by telescreens. The people are constantly reminded of this by the phrase, Big Brother is watching you, which is the core truth of the propaganda system in this state. Since the publication of 1984, the term Big Brother has entered the lexicon as a synonym for abuse of government power, particularly in respect to civil liberties, often specifically related to mass surveillance. So now you know where Big Brother comes from and what it means. DoubleThink. DoubleThink, a word coined by George Orwell in the novel 1984, describes the act of simultaneously accepting 2 mutually contradictory beliefs as correct, often in distinct social contexts. It is related to, but distinct from, hypocrisy and neutrality. Its opposite is cognitive dissonance, where the 2 beliefs cause conflict in one's mind. DoubleThink is an integral concept of Orwell's dystopian novel 1984. DoubleThink. DoubleThink is in use actively all day, every day in our lives. I'd give you examples of DoubleThink, but they are all so politically loaded that if I said any of them, you'd probably get mad at me. So just do a Google search on examples of DoubleThink and read it for yourself. Newspeak. Newspeak is a fictional language in 1984. In the novel, it refers to the deliberately impoverished language promoted by the state. Orwell explained the basic principles of the language in an essay included as an appendix to the novel. Newspeak is closely based on English, but has a greatly reduced and simplified vocabulary and grammar. The totalitarian aim of the party is to prevent any alternative thinking, thought crime, or crime think, in the newest edition of Newspeak, by destroying any vocabulary that expresses such concepts as freedom, free inquiry, individualism, resistance to the authority of the state, and so on. One character, Syme, says admiringly of the diminishing scope of the new language, "It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words." Again, you could do a search on examples of Newspeak in present day. I would just point out political correctness is a form of Newspeak. It doesn't exactly fit what Newspeak was in the book, because in Newspeak it was to create like double meaning words, but political correctness or politically correct words does obscure the meanings of words, but it's not an exact analogy. So do a search on that. But we do know that our language has been dumbed down. Just take a look at books that were written 100 years ago on such a higher level that they're written. Look at how people used to speak. In fact, look at like Patrick Henry. Look at Patrick Henry's speech. The way he spoke back in the 1700s versus the way we speak now. So the language was dumbed down. Our education was dumbed down. I don't even need to prove that to you. You know that we've been dumbed down. We're idiots. Look at the people at the turn of the century in like the 1900s. They were all engineers. Engineers were admired and were the thing that you wanted to be in life. Nowadays, you want to be a celebrity or a professional athlete. And engineers aren't really admired by the masses like they used to be. Orwellian. Orwellian describes the situation, idea, or societal condition that Orwell identified as being destructive to the welfare of a free and open society. It connotes an attitude and a policy of control by propaganda, surveillance, misinformation, denial of truth, and manipulation of the past, including the unperson, a person whose past existence is expunged from the public record and memory, practiced by modern repressive governments. Often, this includes the circumstances depicted in his novels. I'm sure by now you've heard the term Orwellian. Now you know its origin. The memory hole. This one to me is really important. A memory hole is any mechanism for the alteration or disappearance of inconvenient or embarrassing documents, photographs, transcripts, or other records, such as from a website or other archive, particularly as part of an attempt to give the impression that something never happened. So consider this one. How much information about slave owning, if slavery existed, obviously it did, in the 17 and 1800s, all that information's been removed, the majority of it. There's a few that were left behind, but a lot of it's been removed. Further, a lot of the Civil War information, the version you get in school, will not, if you do any individual investigation of the Civil War, it will not match what you learned at school. Another thing removed is the War of 1812. There was a war called the War of 1812. I never learned about it in school, and if we did, it was like briefly glossed over, and much of it was not explained. In fact, I'll ask you, the viewer, did you ever learn about the War of 1812? And if so, what did they tell you? I mean, yeah, it was. I'm sure you'll say this. Oh, it was a war between England and the United States after the War for Independence, Revolutionary War. Yeah, but did they go into it? Did they explain it in depth? And I bet you'll probably say this too. Oh, yeah, this was the war that, the United States kind of came into its own as a force. But the whys, the hows, the details, none of that was explained. And maybe this will be another video. But the best explanation I got for this was from the book The Unseen Hand by Ralph Epperson. He filled in so many blanks. But this is what I'm talking about with the memory hole. They get inconvenient information to just vanish, and they just hope you forget or never find it. Imagine when everything is digitized, they could just do a Control F, find and replace all. And, we say the phrase the winner of the war gets to write the history, we all just say it, but we don't really think about what that means. That means that, yeah, whoever wins the war gets to manufacture a fabricated version of reality. You could completely change history. And so the owners of history have changed hands so many times. How do we know what we're believing is real? I wonder what the oldest history textbook is, because we got to get our hands on that, see what history used to be like before 2 world wars. Thought crime. Thought crime is the criminal act of holding unspoken beliefs or doubts that oppose or question the ruling party. In the book, the government attempts to control not only the speech and actions, but also the thoughts of its subjects. Unacceptable thought is known as crime-think in Newspeak, the ideologically purified dialect of the party. In the book, Winston Smith, the main character, writes in his diary, "Thought crime does not entail death. Thought crime is death." And so years later, decades later, we have the movie Minority Report, where they have the Department of Pre-Crime. And shortly thereafter, we have aspects of the Patriot Act, the Department of Homeland Security, and it had resemblances of the thought crime, Department of Pre-Crime. So thought crime definitely applies. The thought police. The thought police, think poll and Newspeak, are the secret police of the novel 1984. It is their job to uncover and punish thought crime. The thought police use surveillance and psychological monitoring to find and eliminate members of society who challenge the party's authority and ideology. The thought police of Orwell and their pursuit of thought crime were based on the methods used by the totalitarian states and ideologies of the 20th century. They are a satirical expression of Orwell's power of facing unpleasant facts and his willingness to criticize prevailing ideas, which brought him into conflict with others and their smelly little orthodoxies. The term thought police, by extension, has come to refer to real or perceived enforcement of ideological correctness. And, I remember David Icke, he'd say, the sheeple police the sheeple. If you're a conspiracy theorist, think about how people react to you when you point out to them that things aren't the way you've been told they were. They get all upset and they disassociate with you. That's not quite the thought police. The thought police is there to punish you and prevent you from having your own thoughts. And this resonates with me because as a kid, many teachers and parents didn't want me to open the kids' minds and to just keep my intelligent thoughts to myself because the kids couldn't handle the truth. But they were acting like I was going to spoil something. Like, you're going to spoil them. Not spoil them as in like give them goodies, but spoil their minds to ask questions and to think and have critical thinking skills. They didn't want that. They didn't want that for the kids. They just want them to be passive consumers and easily controlled. Propaganda. Propaganda is a form of communication that is aimed at influencing the attitude of a community towards some cause or position. Propaganda is usually repeated and dispersed over a wide variety of media in order to create the chosen result in audience attitudes. As opposed to impartially providing information, propaganda, in its most basic sense, presents information primarily to influence an audience. Propaganda often presents facts selectively, thus possibly lying by omission to encourage a particular synthesis, or uses loaded messages to produce an emotional rather than a rational response to the information presented. The desired result is a change of the attitude toward the subject in the target audience to further a political or religious agenda. Propaganda can be used as a form of political warfare. Essentially, as a conspiracist, your primary enemy is propaganda. That's essentially who you battle with against all the time. It's undoing the propaganda to the masses. The propaganda is so powerful that the people can't believe that what they've been told is not true, and you're in such an uphill battle trying to convince them that they're being lied to. The Ministry of Truth. The Ministry of Truth is Oceania's propaganda ministry. It is responsible for any necessary falsification of historical events. The word truth in the title Ministry of Truth should warn, by definition, that the minister will self-serve its own truth. The title implies the willful fooling of posterity using historical archives to show, in fact, what really happened. As well as administering truth, the administration deploys a new tongue-in-cheek language amongst administrators called Newspeak, in which, for example, truth is understood to mean statements like 2 + 2 = 5 when the situation warrants. It is one of the 4 ministries that govern Oceania. However, as with the other ministries in the novel, the Ministry of Truth is a misnomer and in reality serves the opposite of its purported namesake. In Newspeak, the ministry is known as Mini-True. So, the Ministry of Truth is really the Department of Propaganda. They modify history, they omit things, and then they also manufacture fake history to get you to think that history happened a certain way. It makes you wonder, what about history has been manufactured that wasn't exactly true? A lot of it. 2 + 2 = 5. Examples that are often used to kind of show you how the Ministry of Truth is really the Ministry of Propaganda. You have the proper name for Obamacare is the Affordable Health Care Act, but it's not affordable. You have the war on drugs. Instead of ending drugs, it created more drugs, and so on. And what's really creepy, and I'm not saying this is how it is, but imagine taking this and applying it to the Center for Disease Control. I'm not going to even interpret that one because I just hope that that's not the case. But you see what I'm saying? It could be really bad. But this opposite definition or opposite meaning, it's a lot in our society. There's so much of it, especially in nearly everything. You pick up a brochure when you're at a hotel and see some of the things that it says. Historical revisionism and historiography. Historical revisionism is the reinterpretation of orthodox views on evidence, motivations, and decision-making processes surrounding a historical event. Though the word revisionism is sometimes used in a negative way, constant revision of history is part of the normal scholarly process of writing history. Now, that's a funny sentence too. They try to make it sound like it's okay. Constant revision of history is part of the normal scholarly process of writing history. So one of the best examples of historical revisionism in my time is when I was a little kid, Christopher Columbus discovered America. But by the time I was in middle school and high school, that was beginning to change. They then started to say that Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. And it's not so much that, either way. I know Tony Soprano in The Sopranos was upset when he found out about this. But as a kid, I'm like, whoa, do they have a time machine? How could history change? How can history freaking change? They must have been going back in time. Because, how could something so big as discovering the Americas, how could they get that wrong? Now, did they really find evidence, or did they modify it to suit a political narrative? Or was Christopher Columbus initially chosen as a political move to be the discoverer of America? There's so many different questions on there. If they changed it for simply political reasons, which is probably why, that's on some BS there. If they actually found evidence that suggested otherwise, then that's great. But when things get shifted for political reasons, that becomes propaganda and that becomes the enemy, regardless of what it's actually saying. If it's being done nefariously, that's where conspiracists have a problem. Ingsoc, English Socialism. Newspeak was the official language of the totalitarian state of Oceania. In the totalitarian politics of Oceania, the state possessed control over every aspect of its citizens' lives. The way they dressed, who they associated with, what they did with their free time, and most importantly, their thoughts. To achieve this goal, the government set out to construct a perfect language, a language in which all concepts that went against party policy were removed. The state wanted to destroy every idea that conflicted with Ingsoc, English socialism. The concepts of freedom, liberty, love, privacy, and democracy went against basic party principles, and therefore had to be stamped out. And, since these concepts were becoming non-existent, there was no longer any need to have words to describe them. By destroying the words themselves, the state would be able to destroy the concepts they represented. Once the language had been cleansed, there would be no way to form any resistance against the government. The communication of heretical ideas would be impossible, since the words to describe any unorthodox ideas would not be available. Any would-be revolutionaries would be robbed of the words that were necessary to spread their ideas. Moreover, it prevented anybody from even thinking any dangerous ideas in the first place. But the goal of Newspeak was more than just the mere destruction of words. Scores of words had their meanings altered in order to make certain ideas more palatable for the masses. So when I was in college learning about mass communications, that was my major, TV production, essentially really was propaganda. One of the concepts, the terms that they gave us, it was called selective exposure. And what they said is that we selectively expose people to certain information and intentionally omit other information or never discuss certain topics to the masses, so they'll never know about it. And the way they justify it is, I think it's called biased message processing, saying that people watch TV in order to have their frame of reference reinforced. But I think that frame of reference was manufactured in the first place. But people do that. They do watch things to have they only want to see what they already believe. But when you intentionally omit information from people or get them to turn their heads or don't look here, that's terrible to me. And actually, as I'm reading all of this right now, I'm realizing that the majority of people like to enslave people and like to omit information from other people. People keep their secrets. People try to make things complicated so no one can understand. I'm so not for that. Now, one of the things in this passage here was it's not just the words that were important. It's the concepts they represented. And even though in present day, a lot of people are on board now that I say I go to watch movies to be informed, because it's not so much the specific detail I'm looking for. I'm looking for concepts that put new ideas in your mind, not details. You know, a movie's going to have the details thwarted and modified, and distorted. And that's where, you know, when people call people disinformation agents or shills, oftentimes it's irrelevant to me because I'm looking at the concept that they're presenting, not the specific information. Other people focus so much on the specific information and they miss out on the concept just because part of the data was incorrect. Yeah, you shouldn't trust a person. But why would you take someone's words at face value anyway? I'm out to learn the concepts because the concepts are ideas and ideas are what change things. So controlling a language is very important, you know, and that's what political correctness does. It modifies what a word means and prevents you from expressing what the word once meant and replaces it with a sanitized version of what they want the word to mean, so they don't sound bad. So you know, they changed. I'm not a garbage man. I'm a sanitation engineer. I'm not a secretary. I'm an administrative assistant. I'm not a cop. I'm a law enforcement officer. And so a whole bunch of words or propaganda. The word propaganda has been replaced with the word public relations. Oh, it's not propaganda. It's public relations. So yeah. The field of public relations is the field of propaganda. So when you see the public relations person, it's the propaganda person. But if you said, hey, it's the propaganda guy. What? No, I'm the public relations guy. Oh yeah, the propaganda guy. So public relations, what a trick that was on people. But yeah, public relations is propaganda. And this one I'm actually not making up. Edward Bernays says on camera that he coined the word public relations because after the Nazis made the word propaganda have negative connotation, he had to create a modification word for propaganda because he had written a book called Propaganda, and so he changed it to public relations. And that's why they say Edward Bernays is the father of public relations. But he's the father of propaganda. If you don't know who Edward Bernays is, he might be more important to read about than 1984. They're neck and neck. They go hand in hand. Oceania, EastAsia, Eurasia. These are the three regions of the world. And it's amazing. It's an amazing prophecy that was in here. I mean, I'm pretty sure Orwell got the info from somebody, but Oceania is North and South America. And if you look at the FTAA, that's the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas. And it essentially combines North and South America into one. Then you have Eurasia, which was, I can't really remember, but it was like Europe plus like Russia. And I don't remember who had Africa. And then you had EastAsia, and that was like the rest of everything. And these are like the three major regions of the one world order, the way they want to do it. And these three groups would have different enemies at different times, but no real battles or any loss of border was ever, maybe like 1 or 2 miles. But they don't fight each other, and it's the three regions. Everybody from EastAsia doesn't like the people in Oceania and vice versa, and they're told stories about each other that makes them not like their enemy, kind of like the Russians and the Americans. The Russians were told the Americans were bad, and the Americans were told the Russians were bad, or I should say the Soviets were bad. And so we were both told to hate each other. And so yeah, these are just divide and conquer methods of control and prevents people from meeting each other. So to wrap it all up, I want to just go back to the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. It says it's by Emmanuel Goldstein. He's like this fictional... The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism is a book that Winston reads in the book. So it's a book within the book. And there's 2 chapters of it. So there's 3 chapters. Winston has time to read 2 of the chapters. He reads chapter 1 and chapter 3. I think he reads chapter 3 first and then reads chapter 1. And you never get to hear chapter 2 or any of the other chapters. And you'll want to because, like I said, the most info is packed. The most info you could find, if you want the blueprint to enslavement, it's in this particular section. And you'll be like, man, I would pay anything to get chapter 2 or chapter 4 if it exists, because it's just got so much info in it. The chapter titles are Freedom is Slavery, Ignorance is Strength, War is Peace. And it's the most important part of the book. To me, the reason to read 1984 is to read this particular section. And what's mind-blowing to me is this section is never really mentioned by people. Like I said, most people just remember Big Brother. They never say anything about the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism other than they recall the titles for the chapters. War is Peace, Ignorance is Strength, Freedom is Slavery. They remember that, but they don't remember the contents. So some of the stuff that I remember from the contents are that they find the smartest people of society and remove them and put them on weapons projects to design weapons. And the weapons are to destroy things and is the primary reason for war. So in it says, the primary reason for war isn't what you think. You would think the primary reason would be to kill people. But the primary reason is to destroy manufactured goods. All right? So think about that. Is to destroy manufactured goods. And the reason why is they did not want to have any surplus. Because if there's a surplus, then people won't have to work. And if people won't have to work, then they'll have free time. So, and check this. In this section, it says that the machines, the word technology, I don't think existed at the time. So they called everything machines. And it said the machines exist now so that no man should ever have to toil with labor. But instead of using these machines to free and liberate mankind and give them free time, they will be used as an inflation on productivity to get people to have to work even more than they did before. And think about this. When I was a kid in the 80s, we were told that the technology, by the time we're 30, everything will be automated and we'll never have to work. And that technology is going to make our lives so much easier and we're going to have so much extra time. Well, that never happened. It could have happened. It's not like the technology's not there. It just never did. So what happened in 1984 happened in 1984, or at least in 1994, 2004, 2014. And this is the reason why this is important to me is that, I'm always talking about artificial scarcity and the loss of free time. And Orwell saw these two things as interconnected and as the whole agent of liberation. And that's the automation to give you free time. But the artificial scarcity exists. And so anyway, it's all outlined here. Oh, and it said that if they left the intelligent people in society, they would create all the inventions to liberate people. And they can't have that. So that's why they put the most smartest people on the weapons projects to destroy all the manufactured goods. There's tons of other stuff in there, but to me, that's the most important concept that you get from it. And you'll see a parallel of this in Orwell's other world-famous book, Animal Farm. In Animal Farm, the animals in the farm all try to build a windmill so that they could get free energy. Right as they're about to complete the windmill, the head pig, Napoleon, stages a false terrorist attack and blames it on his enemy Snowball and destroys the windmill so that the animals have to rebuild it again. And so they work and they work and they work to hopefully one day fix that get that windmill going so they could enjoy the good life. And every time, right when they're about to get it, Napoleon stages another terrorist attack, a false flag event, and blames it on Snowball. And Snowball was their friend, so they couldn't imagine why Snowball would do this. And Napoleon tells them all these lies about Snowball. So, 1984, Animal Farm, these were written in the 40s, the 1940s. And we're almost in the 2020s. This is why this book is so powerful. It's the blueprint. So, that's what I got to say about this. I hope I've convinced you or persuaded you that this is, or propagandized you, that 1984 is a substantial book. Specifically, if you don't want to read the whole book, go to that newspeakdictionary.com that I have the link at the beginning of this video. It has the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism for free to read online. And also, if you type it into YouTube, that good narrator I was telling you about, he narrates the whole thing. The problem is that the video online has the Soviet national anthem behind it the whole entire time. So it's kind of hard to hear the audio. But it's there for you. Anyway, that's a 30-minute primer on 1984. I hope it's done its job. I hope you learned something. I hope you got a little bit more insight on things, how the propaganda works, how they try to own your mind with your thoughts in language. And I'll see you in the next video.